Hello, and welcome to the Empowerography podcast. This is a platform created for women's voices to be heard and a place to share their stories, journeys, and successes with the world for the purpose of helping other women who might be on similar journeys. We are empowering women one episode at a time. I'm your host, Brad Walsh, so kick back, grab one of your favorite beverages, and enjoy the stories. Please join us on Wednesday, March 8th to celebrate International Women's Day at the 3rd Annual Empowerography Live Women's Online Conference. The event will be running from 9:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will have 31 of the most incredibly inspirational, transformative, and influential women around who will be speaking at the conference. You can pick up tickets on my website at www.empowerographypodcast.com. They're on sale now for only $20 Canadian. That's $15 for our U.S. friends. We hope to see you there. Hello there, Brad Walsh here, your host of the Empowerography podcast. Today, my guest is Andrea Sampson. She is the CEO and founder of Talk Boutique. She's also an executive speakers coach who works with TED speakers. Welcome, Andrea. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Brad. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much for taking and making the time to be here with me today. I'm really excited about jumping in and learning more about your journey and sharing all about all the things Andrea and Talk Boutique.
Yeah, I'm excited as well.
So I'm curious, Andrea, as mentioned, you're the CEO and founder of Talk Boutique. You're also involved in the TEDx community. And as I mentioned, you're an executive speakers coach who works also with TED speakers. What were you doing for a living before you started up Talk Boutique?
Yeah, so it's a bit of an eclectic background. So I come out of the marketing and advertising world. In fact, I spent the first probably almost 25 years of my career working in marketing and advertising, working for some of the largest agency networks in the world on some of the world's most recognizable brands. And I was a strategist, a planner. My job was to understand why we make the buying decisions we make. I did a lot of research. I did a lot of analysis. And what I would do in the agency world was to uncover core insights, what we would use as the basis for ad campaigns. So I worked between the client, so the brand itself, and the creative teams who were developing the creative. So I was sort of that in between, representing the voice of the consumer.
And so then what was the catalyst for you to leave corporate behind and make the jump into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I got to a point in my career, after, like I said, almost 25 years of looking at myself. And in fact, I was approaching 50 at the time. And I started asking myself, where from here? I looked at my life and went back to those early days of my career and realized that all those goals that I had set out for myself, whatever they were, I had already achieved them. And here I was, working, I was a senior leader in, one of the largest agency networks in the world, and was like, okay, and I don't feel fulfilled. And so I didn't know what I was looking for. I only knew I was looking for something. And I started going to conferences, and one of them that I went to was a TEDx conference here in Toronto. It was in the early days of TEDx, and TEDx Toronto at the time, and continues today, was one of the largest and most respected of the TEDx's worldwide.
Really? Worldwide, Toronto?
Yeah.
Wow.
In fact, TEDx Toronto was either the first or the second TEDx ever to be offered worldwide. Yeah, we were very much ahead of the curve. There was an amazing team who brought the brand to Toronto. I unfortunately wasn't part of that team, but I came on board a couple of years later. But anyway, I'd gone to the TEDx conference and was blown away, and came to find out it was all volunteer run. So I put my hand up and said, hey, I want to be a part of this. And I got hired as a speakers coach, because all TEDx's are run by volunteers.
Okay.
But they were very choosy on who they brought on. And so I went through it was an entire interview process. But I didn't know what a speakers coach was. The reality was I had spent most of my career presenting in front of very large audiences, so I didn't think it was a big stretch for me. But I learned pretty quickly that, the TED world is a completely different world when it comes to presentations. And a TED Talk is like no other talk you will ever give. And what I learned in that first year of working as a TED speaker coach, a TEDx speaker coach, was invaluable. And it shifted and shaped everything that has come from that point forward. And that was, gosh, over 10, maybe 12 years ago now, as I look back.
Volunhired. I love that.
It's
Now,
better than voluntold.
Yes, absolutely. I've been voluntold. Yes, absolutely. Now, I'm curious then, with what you said about how rigorous the process was. Now, I know that just from speaking to different people, how tough the process is to become a speaker. So I can only imagine the depth and what's the word I'm looking for? The process to become a TED speaker coach. Like, it's got to be far more intense than the process to become a speaker.
Well, every TEDx is different, but what I can tell you about TEDx Toronto, and especially at that time, is they had the team that was running it were just a special group of individuals. Many of them came out of the tech world, startup world, and out of the agency world, actually. And they knew what they were looking for. And it wasn't so much a skill set as it was a mindset. They wanted people who were curious about the future, who wanted to create an impact, and who were willing to take on a very demanding volunteer role. I mean, the reality was, as a speakers coach working on TEDx Toronto, I was probably putting in between 10 and 15 hours a week of volunteer work for about 6 months on top of, an already very packed schedule as a senior executive in advertising. And so it was rigorous. I mean, I went through several interviews. They did reference checks. I mean, it was all of that. And when I'll never forget walking into my very first meeting, because one of the things I didn't understand about being volunteered at that point was that not only was I a speakers coach, I was being asked to be a speakers coach, but I was actually part of the programming team, which meant that I was part of the team that was going to be selecting all the speakers for for that year. And so that was a big wow of like, holy cow, how do you even find, speakers, right? And so I remember walking in, and there were I think there were about 8 people sitting around the table on the programming team. And I was clearly the oldest person in the room, and they were so smart. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like, first of all, didn't know this whole world existed. And secondly, I feel really, really honored to be amongst this group of people.
Now, I'm sure that, there's a lot of listeners out there who would love to know and who are very interested in the process to become a TEDx speaker. And for those who might not know the process, could you walk us through a little bit of that and how it works? I mean, also, I'm curious too, I've got all these questions that are just coming to mind here. To be a volunteer to work with TED, is that process rigorous as well, just to volunteer, not to become a coach, but just to volunteer with TED?
So yes, I mean, to work on the TEDx brand, especially in TEDx Toronto, but, and again, just to be clear, TEDx, the difference between TED and TEDx, and maybe we'll start there. TED is a not-for-profit organization headquartered out of New York with an event that happens yearly in Vancouver. And that is an organization. So that's not volunteer. That is, that's a group of people who are paid to do that. And they have several events. So they have the big event that happens in Vancouver. They have TED Women. And then they have 1 or 2 other events that happen somewhere in the world throughout the year. But those are TED events. TEDx is a licensed brand. So in order to get a TEDx license, you have to apply to TED. They give you a license, and there's a series of requirements that you need to follow in order to maintain that brand. And so TEDx organizers are all over the world, and every TEDx there's a playbook in terms of how you run a TEDx event, but there's a lot left up to the organizer themselves. So, some of the things that are true regardless is that you cannot be paid to be on a TEDx event. It is completely volunteer run, and speakers are not paid to be on a TEDx stage or on a TED stage, which again is part of it. But from there, and then there are guidelines, but every TEDx organizer will do their own approach. But I can tell you generally, and being in the TEDx community and having, spent time with many, many TEDx organizers worldwide. We all tend to do things in a similar way. So the first thing is you need to find speakers. And in order to find speakers, there's two main ways that happens. One is through what's called a community nomination process. So they put out a call for entries, and anyone can nominate someone as a TEDx speaker. Now, again, not all TEDx's do this, but this is generally one of the ways in which it's done. So there's usually a nomination process where you go into usually an online form and you can answer a number of questions to nominate someone. Now, you can nominate someone you know, or you can nominate yourself. Self-nomination is totally fine, and it's not looked at in any way different from an external nomination. And so that's one way in which we find TED speakers or TEDx speakers. The other way is through the committee itself, through the organizing. And what we would do on TEDx Toronto is it would be a combination of people we would bring to the table as the committee, along with the community nomination process. And through that process for TEDx Toronto, when I worked on it, we would get usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 750 to 1,000 applications or nominations for about 10 to 12 spots on stage.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, and we would read everyone. It didn't matter whether we brought that person to the table or whether they were nominated. Everything was treated in the same way. And so we read every application. We reviewed every potential speaker we would do. And most of the time, no one would know this was going on. So we did all of this sort of a bit in isolation of any of those nominations. And then at a certain point, we would shortlist it down to usually about 20 to 30. And at that point, then we would start inviting some interaction with the potential speaker for us to get a better sense of who makes sense for the stage for that year.
That is an incredibly laborious process. 750 to 1,000, and you have to go through every single one of them.
I mean, there were usually about anywhere from 6 to 10 of us that were going through those applications, and we would meet weekly. It would take us about 4 weeks to get fully through it and to shortlist it. And let me tell you, like the meetings that we would have, because every week we would get together, we would each have so many that we would have to review. And then we would come back to the table with our favorites that we would pitch, to each other. And then it would be, the yay or nay process. And then it would get heated, like we would, somebody would be in love with somebody and another person would go, no, they don't, and so we would have those kinds of interactions. And it was, but it was fun and it was important. Yeah. Like we really, really felt that it was important that we do that kind of work and that we give everybody the same chance because, everybody has the opportunity to create a difference. And we wanted to make sure that we got the right people on the stage and not just the people that one of us or two of us thought were right.
And so this is once a year only.
Yeah. Well, again, everyone is different, but
yeah.
TEDx Toronto, yes, that's correct.
Wow. I can't believe that. So how long in total then would it take you from the time you got your 750 to 1,000 applications to finally picking the 10 spots?
It would take us about 6 weeks.
Okay. Well, that's not too bad. I mean,
no.
from that amount to whittle it down to 10 and 6, that's pretty damn good, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, it was a rigorous process because, you had to identify those speakers, but then you had to put them through. And what we would do is we put them through a coaching protocol. And again, not all TEDx's do this, but right. We did. We felt it was very important that every speaker who were on our stage be coached.
Yeah.
And so that coaching protocol, it was about a 12-week coaching protocol that we would put people through. So we had to have people identified at least 3 months prior to the event. And in fact, it was really it was 16 weeks by the time you put in, first of all, you had to notify them, you had to get everybody, like all of the logistical stuff. And so by the time the coaching started, that took you about a month into all the logistics because everyone is doing this as a volunteer and, we've got real lives that happen.
Yeah, for sure. So you had stated that you were doing this while you were working in the industry. So you were volunteering and your full-time job. So I'm curious how the whole story unfolds in terms of Talk Boutique. Where does that come in? Can you elaborate more on that story and where and how Talk Boutique came about?
Sure. So that first year, I said I was sort of in this place of searching of what was next for me. I was still working and, was sort of in the question, I guess. And I started working on TEDx. And that first year I coached 4 speakers. And I remember being blown away by the quality of people I was working with. But more importantly, the world I was getting to see. Because as you start working with these speakers, you get a peek into their world. And, I was working with scientists and academics who were literally changing the world. And I remember at the time thinking, why have I never heard of any of this? Like our world is so good at telling us all the bad news that's going on, but we don't get to see the good news. And suddenly here I am working with people who are doing good things and big things in the world. And I started to have this epiphany of, wait a minute, maybe this is my tribe. Maybe these are the people that I'm meant to be around. And so I came back the next year as a speakers coach. They actually wanted me to be the director of programming, and I turned it down because I wasn't ready to step into a bigger role. But that year, I really went deep in working with only scientists and academics, and it really just blew me away. So the next year when I came back, I took on the role of director of programming. And in that year, I started to really understand what was happening behind the scenes of our world. Like I got to see so many good things happening. And I, at that point, decided to take a sabbatical from advertising. I quit my job and decided that I was going to make some big life changes. And I didn't know what I was going to be doing. I only knew at that point that it was time for me to do something different. And so I was director of programming for TEDx Toronto. I was in the process of selling my home and buying a new one and traveling and doing all of these things. And in the question of what was next for me. And I remember coming back, the event itself, TEDx Toronto, takes place in the fall. And I think it was in October that year. And I remember around September sitting down with a couple of my speakers coaches. So I was the director of programs. So I had about 6, I think, speakers coaches who were working with me on the event that year. And a couple of us were sitting down talking about this incredible roster of speakers we had ready to go on stage. And we were always blown away by the speakers that we had. And, I remember speaking with one of them and saying, wouldn't it be great if this is what we could do every day? And this particular person looked at me and he said, well, you could, like, this is a job. And I was like, no one would ever pay me for this. And he was like, absolutely, they would pay you for this. And so we got to talking. And it was from that conversation that we formed Talk Boutique. And when I originally launched Talk Boutique, it was with a partner. I now own the company 100% myself, but in the early days, I did have a partner. And so we launched it from that place. And we launched it not only because this was something that I loved to do, but actually where the conversation started was from the place of, wow, it's so sad that those 1,000 people that we get the applications from, and those 10 people or 12 people who make it onto stage, all of them are doing such good work in the world. And it's so sad that the world doesn't know about them. And as we were talking, we were sort of formulating like, well, what would it take in order for them to be known in the world? And, like one of the realities of most TED speakers is that they're not a fully formed speaker. Like they're often so busy doing the work, they're not telling anyone about it. So they don't have a talk or a video or, a platform. They're just often a scientist or an academic or a technologist or somebody who's doing really big work in the world. And so we were like, well, you'd have to train them. I mean, number one, you'd have to help them in terms of their ability to speak. But then It was like, yes, and you'd also have to help them get the assets they need in order to be seen. Like they need a video, they need all of these things.
Yeah.
And so we were like, well, what could that look like? And it was through that. It was like, well, what if we created a business where we were a speakers bureau who focused on these deep subject matter experts, and we helped them to get the videos, to get the platform, to do all of that. And on the other side of it, we were also speakers coaches who worked with them. And so we had both sides of the business. And that was how it was born. It was born out of the desire to help these deep subject matter experts be seen in the world and be heard, so that the work that they're doing could get the amplification that it deserves. Because some of them make it onto a TED stage, 10 or 12.
Mm-hmm.
But there were, hundreds more who were equally as deserving, but for whatever reason just didn't make it that particular year. What about them? Who's helping them? And so that was the impetus behind Talk Boutique.
And Talk Boutique was born. I love it. So the gentleman that you were first talking about this with, like you said, he told you, oh, yes, you certainly can. Is he the gentleman who you started Talk Boutique with?
Yes, he is.
Okay. And what happened, if I may ask, that he just moved on? He didn't want to be part of it anymore?
Well, I think, in retrospect, we all come into things from different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm what's the word I'm looking for? I'm a glass half full. I'm an optimist and I'm an idealist. That's the word I'm looking for. I'm an idealist. And so when I started Talk Boutique, from my perspective, what I wanted to do was help people. And in helping people, I knew that, that I could make a living doing that, or at least I thought and hoped that that was the case.
Right.
And for my ex-business partner, he's much more of a capitalist. And so he came at it from, hey, here's a great opportunity to make money. And in doing so, we can help people. And that in the early days didn't really seem like our overall need and desire and values base of helping people was there. The overlap was there. But as the business became more and more successful, it became clearer and clearer that priority mismatch was really driving us in different directions.
Right. And
it started to really drive a wedge between us. And in fact, what happened was, and I think sometimes this is the case when you've got a values mismatch, there was a lot of suspicion around motives and around why one or the other was doing something. And it just became very untenable very quickly. And so we made the decision to split up actually about 3 days before the pandemic hit.
Oh, wow.
Was a whole other thing. But, I'm grateful to him for helping to get this business off the ground. And I'm very glad that we both made the decision we did when we did, regardless of whether the pandemic hit.
Yeah. And so Talk Boutique, you help people with TEDx Talks, but your focus is to help more so, I guess, those who don't get the opportunity to get on the TED stage and they have something big and something worth saying and something people worth hearing to put out into the world. You help them get talks elsewhere.
Yeah. And so now, the way that I describe what we do now is that we help experts and change makers transform into thought leaders by helping them to understand the power of story and utilize it to convey their messages so that they can create the impact that they want to make. And, if you think about TED is an incredible storytelling platform, but it's, story is essential in the elements of getting people to understand, but equally as important, and this is what TED does so incredibly well, is it's all about the idea. It's
right.
Ideas worth sharing. And so when you take an idea and you wrap it in story, which is what a TED Talk is, what you get is you get an opportunity to create impact in a way that is not possible using data, facts, and the ways in which so many experts and change makers tend to convey their message.
Beautiful. Now, as you just mentioned, a big part of what you do at Talk Boutique is transforming experts and change makers into thought leaders. So I'm curious, what's the difference between an expert, regular leadership, and thought leadership?
Yeah, it's a good question. So an expert I mean, there's, if we think of experts, there are literally millions of experts out there. Experts are people who are highly trained, deeply committed to whatever their craft or expertise is. And they may or may not be a leader. If you think about a leader may or may not be an expert. Those two things are mutually exclusive. There is overlap, but they aren't necessarily the same thing. But the transformation, whether you're a leader or an expert or a change maker, into a thought leader is a very different thing, because the difference between any of those previous things, leader, change maker, expert, and a thought leader, is the level of understanding that the audience has with what it is that thought leader is conveying. And that level of understanding comes through the use of many different techniques. And, as a leader or an expert or a change maker, they probably would never call themselves a thought leader. And it's not a title we claim ourselves. It's what our audience gives us. And why do they give us that? Because what we've done is we've helped to transform data and fact and story into wisdom. We've given our audience information in a way that makes sense for them. And we've done that because through the lens of our own experience. And that's what thought leaders do. They use their experience, their lived experience, their life experience as a way for others to understand complex information and really important world-changing concepts, and to do that in a way that we each understand. It's why we need more diversity in thought leadership, because that lived experience is such an essential part of the thought leadership. We each understand it when we hear it put through a lens that maybe one of us has an understanding of. And I think we, as a woman, this is something that I saw a lot growing up, when I used to, when I was in my advertising days, I would get asked a lot, who were your mentors growing up? And I didn't really have any. Why? Well, because most of the leaders who were out there didn't really look like me. Mm-hmm. And so it was hard for me to even understand some of the leadership concepts, because it was told through a lens that was so foreign to me. Today, we see more women in leadership roles, and we have some really amazing female thought leaders who are helping to make female leadership a lot more accessible to the generations that are coming up. And it's because they're using their lived experience. And that's what a thought leader does. It's the incorporation of story, of data, of knowledge, of fact, of experience, all put together in such a way that the people listening have insights and epiphanies that they couldn't have had without all of that together.
I love it. Now, keeping with that same theme of women in leadership, I'm curious your thoughts on how women continue, because let's be honest, those barriers are still there, quite prevalent for women. So how do you think, in your opinion, from your experience and what you've been through and what you've experienced, and now being an entrepreneur yourself, how do women continue to break through those barriers and continue to evolve for other women? How do they continue to blaze that trail and break through so that more women can continue on that path as well, do you think?
Well, I think number one, and I say this not because I'm in this business, but because I think it's really important, is they need to use their voice. They need to use their voice as a platform. We need more diversity of thought leadership, and we need to hear more women talking. I think it's essential. So I think that's one way. But I also, like I said, I didn't have any mentors because I couldn't see anyone who looked like me. And when we think about women as a group, we're not one thing. We're many things. There are, women of color. There are women with different cultural backgrounds. There are women like me who are neurodiverse. We all have a different approach. And so when we come forward and use our voice and use our authenticity and show ourselves for all the different ways that we are diverse, it allows others to come forward as well. Equally important, though, is that we continue to choose to move into leadership roles, because I think this is something right now, especially coming out of the last couple of years, where women were really tasked to take on so much of the burden of not only their jobs, but also the home life. And we saw so many women exit the workforce, and it's endemic. It's a real problem. And we need women to, first of all, choose to step into that leadership role. And then secondly, to, in doing so, to put the boundaries around themselves to keep themselves well. Because it's not being a leader in the historic ways that we've been told leadership should be. Because those historic ways were the ways in which men led.
The patriarch. Yeah, absolutely.
And we don't live in that world anymore. And we have to create our own way. And so there's where we need female leadership to step in and say, this is how we lead. I work with a group called Lean In Canada. Lean In is a group of women leaders and looking at that very thing. And so last year I was working with the board chair, and we worked on a couple of different talks around this. And she had such an amazing approach to looking at what it is to create balance. And I think, and if any of the listeners want to learn about that, I think they should check out Lean In Canada. I think some of those talks are recorded. But what she was saying was, it is okay to say no. It is okay to put the boundaries around, but it is also okay to choose to step in and to do more. But these are all choices that we make. And those choices have to be based on finding the place of balance, because when we say yes to a leadership role, we're actually saying no to some other parts of our lives. And that is essential for women to hear and understand. It's not doing it all. You can have it all, just not at the same time.
Yes, that is a very important piece to point out. And Andrea, can you share, is there a web address for the women to check out?
You know what? Let me just look it up. Again, I'm not affiliated with them. Like, we've done some work with them. And it's Lean In Canada.
I'll put it in the show notes as well.
Yeah, it's leanincanada.com.
Okay, perfect. I've been speaking with a friend of mine a fair bit about this type of thing, and she was saying that she's encountering and connecting with and meeting a lot of women lately, and the conversation seems to be the same, where women are leaving corporate like a mass exodus because of the burnout. Yep. Because it's so huge. And this plays right into that whole leadership bit. And yes, I mean, women have been programmed to believe that they can't have it all. You have to choose one or the other, career or home, career or kids, or whatever the case may be. And you're right, women can have it all, but just not at once. But if they're willing to step into that role of leadership, you're right, there are bits that are going to have to be sacrificed, but it is possible. I think the world would be so much better off if more women stepped into those roles. We would see a huge shift around the world.
Absolutely. And like, the thing about it is, it's not just women. The reality is, no one can have it all at the same time.
That's right.
And it's something that, if we look historically at the work world, men, that was known, right? And, historically, it was the woman stayed home and looked after the house and the kids and made sure that the life, that everything that the man needed was there so that he could go out and be stressed and do the work and do all the things that were required. When women came into the workforce, that shared load, there was some understanding of it, and there was some, to some degree, some discussion of it, but it never really equalized. And today, especially because of the pandemic, because we saw, suddenly women were all working from home, and kids were, now, at home because they were homeschooling. And all of a sudden, everything was expected all at once of many of these female leaders. And so that really sort of broke that paradigm that, we could do it all, and we just can't. And no one, like I said, and no one can, but it's no denying it now, I guess, is what it did.
But that's a very good point you make, though, because yes, the men went out to work and it came off as they were doing everything, but they weren't. behind every good man is an incredibly powerful and amazing woman, because she's at home. Back in those days, she's at home doing everything. So he didn't have to fucking worry about anything else.
Exactly.
All he had to do is fucking go to work and make the money, while the woman was the one at home doing all the other things. So it made it all seem seamless. And this man was doing all of these things. No, he fucking wasn't. He was going to work, and that's it.
That's it.
And not to minimize
No.
him going to work, but it goes to your point that no one can do it all. Women or men, it doesn't matter who it is, you cannot do it all. And honestly, I believe, I'm of the mindset that we aren't meant to do entrepreneurship alone. We aren't meant to do life alone. It's all about community and support.
Absolutely.
And that's the key.
Absolutely. And I think this is where, as women, because we've been socialized that we should do it all, we can do it all. And it's pushing back against that socialization and saying, not only is that not true, we can't do it all, no one can do it all.
That's right.
And because of that, we know, and this is where women are really good, because community is one of the leadership traits that most women bring, because it's innate for the most part to women. We love being in community. And so it's getting over the belief that to be in community, to lead through community is in some way less than. And that's simply not true.
No,
In
it's
fact,
necessary.
Not only is it necessary, it's actually way more effective. And that's what the world needs today.
Absolutely.
And we saw that again when we look at, if we go back to the early days of the pandemic, female-led countries fared better than male-led.
100%. Well, surprise.
Right. Why? Because what they did was they took care of the community.
Yes.
Right?
100%.
And
100%.
so we saw it in action. And, and so these are the things where it's just really allowing these things to be true.
That's an uphill battle, though, because it's a hard thing to convince people. I mean, I think back to when I was a kid even, and community was such a big part of my parents' life and my life. And I think my mom used to babysit like 6, 7 kids, like the parents dropped their kids off at neighbors' houses. You think about it now, we don't even fucking know who our neighbors are. We don't talk to them, nothing. We need to get back to those days of community and support. It is so integral, in my belief, to everything, to life. It's a lifeblood. We need it.
Well, when you talk about community, and even the example of like looking after kids, what we're really talking about here is an element of emotional intelligence, right? Because that's actually what happens, because within a community, you have a sense of self-awareness, of empathy. You've got to have some conflict management skills. You've got to be adaptive.
Yeah.
You've got to have teamwork. And yet, those are the very things that are often subjugated in the corporate world.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want empathy here, right? Except without empathy, how can we possibly have trust?
Exactly.
And without trust, how can we possibly achieve anything?
We have a lot of work ahead of us, that's for damn sure. But again, I think that if we get more women into these pivotal and leadership roles, that will help everything evolve hugely. It's so important.
Oh, gosh, yeah. And, I think I'm, as I look out, having been in the corporate world for more than 30 years, I see huge shifts. And I think one of the things that humans do, we live short lives, let's face it. We've got, we might be on the planet for 80 or 90 years, and it's
a finite amount of time.
Yeah. And we can maybe see, 150 years in either direction, just by way of looking. And the reality is, when we look at the progress that has been made in the last 20 years, it's phenomenal. But yet there's more work to be done. And I think this is where we can't forget that we are moving in the right direction. It's important to give ourselves that victory, because look, I remember when I started my career, I started off as a legal secretary many, many, many years ago. This was in the 80s. And my very first job and I was young, and I showed up at work, and I was, working for a law firm, and the office manager sat me down and said, okay, here are the rules. And one of the rules was there was a dress code. And in that dress code was that women were not allowed to wear pants to work.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That was in the 80s. Okay.
Jesus.
And why? It was because the managing partner did not like women in pants. Yeah. So, now today, that, of course, I mean, and this was a law firm, right?
Yeah.
But today, that would be a discrimination cause,
Yes.
right? So, look at that, yeah, okay, the 80s that's about 40 years ago now.
Yeah.
But it's really not that long when you think about
No.
it, right? I remember, when I was in advertising and finally being asked to be in the boardroom with all the men. And it was pretty clear that, you were asked to be in the boardroom, not to share your opinion.
No.
Right? You were getting a privilege to be there and to learn. And, you were to be seen and not heard.
This is laughable though. I'm like,
Yeah.
like
that's in my career, right? That's in my career. And I started in advertising in the late 90s. So it's not that long ago.
No.
Was like, I can remember conversations where it was, who is the best looking girl in the office? And let's make sure she's at the table.
So yes, we have made progress, definitely. But there's still so much more work to be done, and I think this also speaks to a piece where, as you said, yes, we've made progress and it's pretty big, and we need to, I think, as a race, as human beings, because this is another piece of that puzzle, is that we don't slow down to look and to appreciate how far we have come. We don't slow down to celebrate the wins. We don't slow down to look at them and see how far we've come, because we're so busy checking those things off the fucking list. And then as soon as you're done that, it's like, okay, on to the next. No, we need to slow down and appreciate where we've been and where we are now.
But, I think this brings us full circle back to the beginning of our conversation around TED Talks.
Yeah.
Because, if you think about any good TED Talk, it's actually often a TED Talk that helps us to see some of that progress, or to see something, an old concept that we all thought we knew, said in a new way. Because that speaker, that author, took the time to slow down, took the time to reflect on what had happened, and to give us a perspective that was accessible through their point of view as the expert or the change maker, really becoming the thought leader. And it's so powerful, right? This is why it's so important that not only women, but, diverse individuals take the time to really use who they are, what they know, and why they know it, to help us see through their eyes so that we can grow along with them.
To move everything forward.
Yeah.
Absolutely. To elevate the consciousness. For sure. I love it. I am so loving this conversation, Andrea. Amazing. I'm so inspired and fired up, and it's just incredible. So thank you for all of this, for bringing your viewpoints to this. I'm curious to know how Talk Boutique has evolved as a company from when you first founded it to where you are now.
Yeah, it has evolved a lot. Like I said, in those early days, we were a speakers bureau and a coaching company. And today we still have both of those parts to the business, but the why we do what we do has really shifted. And in fact, like I said, we are really focused on creating or building thought leaders. For me, it really is about creating impact in our world. When I think about the early days, we were looking at TED speakers, and now from what I know today, I know that we're building a future right now, every one of us. And the future that we want to create, and, you talk to anyone and they'll say, well, we need to focus on climate change, or we need to focus on, governance, or there's so many different ways in which our future people are believing our future needs to be driven. But what I know to be true, and what our company now, Talk Boutique, focuses on, is the concept of storytelling through the lens of idea. Why? Because our future is the sum total of the stories that we told ourselves today. So if we are telling stories today and they're not what we want, well, then the future that we're creating 15 years from now will not be what we want. And so we all have a responsibility to tell our stories through the lens of what we want and not what we don't want. And so that is what I'm focused on. It's about telling stories that have deeply held ideas inside of them that connect to a vision for the future that we all want.
I love that. And I think it's incredibly important to mention too, is that we all have stories to tell and share that have importance, that carry weight. Because so many people, you hear them, and I'm sure you hear this all the time. Who's going to want to listen to me? What do I have to say that anyone's going to want to hear, right?
I hear that every day. And
exactly.
I hear it from people that, for the most part, anyone would be like, oh my God, I want to hear that person's story. Yet that person doesn't see themselves that way. And that's so much of the problem, is that especially if they come from a diverse background, whether they're a woman, have a different cultural background, maybe they're older, perhaps they're neurodiverse, in those groups, it's even greater, that reticence to tell your story, because, well, who wants to hear mine? Except that we need to hear it.
It's a necessity. Absolutely. So how do we get past that? How do we help these people to see that, yes, your story is important. Your story matters. And first and foremost, you do have a story, because again, I believe every single person on this planet has a story to share. Everybody.
Well, our lives are stories.
Yeah.
And they're unfolding, one chapter at a time. And so when we understand that, that's a part of it. But how do we get people to step up and tell their stories? We need to be better listeners. I think that's part of it.
Oh, 100%. It's funny you mentioned that, because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about this. And I mean, there are so many different types of listening, right? People listen just so that they can speak. People are distracted listeners. And then we've got the active listeners, people who actually go into a conversation with an open mind, open ears, and actually pay attention and listen. And so she said to me, I'll bet you if you walk down the street and asked 100 people if they thought they were good listeners, 99% of those people would say yes. So I did a little poll in my Facebook group about that. And 78% of the people said they were good listeners.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I mean, what we know to be true is that very few people actually listen through the lens of curiosity.
Yes.
Because listening through the lens of how I'm going to respond is not listening.
No, it's not at all.
Right. And so when we listen from a place of curiosity, and I think that, again, that skill is not taught.
No, it's not. You're right.
As a coach, and especially as a speaker's coach, that's a big part of what I do. And I listen very, very deeply to what people tell me. And it has been an interesting skill to develop, because what I've found, when you listen very, very deeply, you hear through their words. And, part of the coaching process, so when I'm working with a new speaker, I'll have them just talk to me and tell me their story. And it's usually how we start. And I listen, and then I will say back to them their story, so they can hear their story said as a listener, right? Because how often do we hear ourselves, right? And so I do that. And when I tell them their story back, I tell them it with an idea in mind. And so often what happens is that person, there's usually the response is initially, wow, how did you know that about me? And it's interesting because they just told me. They literally told me that. And yet they didn't even listen to what they said. Now, I often take some liberties because I can hear between the words. As a speaker's coach is what we have to do. But even in that, they have told it to me, whether they know it or not. And so there is a sense of, first of all, how did you know that about me? The second thing that often happens is they become quite emotional. I've had so many, often, the most powerful beings who break down in tears at hearing their own stories said back to them.
Well, because you're actually listening, though. You're actually paying attention.
And they don't realize how powerful their story is.
Yeah.
And that's what I want them to hear, is the power of that story. And it is quite a humbling experience. And it's an honor for me to be able to do that because, I'm amazed at what happens in that shift when they hear their story and suddenly they hear how important it is to tell it.
I think that's beautiful. And, for me, as a podcast host, I look at it as an honor that I get to sit with women like yourself and all the other women that I've interviewed. And I often compare what I do to when a woman's telling her story to me. It's like I am the passenger in the car and we're going for a drive and their story is the vehicle. And I have the honor of sitting in that car beside them as they share that journey. And they've allowed me into the car to go with them for that ride. Mm-hmm. And that for me is such an incredible honor.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, I think it's an interesting analogy of being in the car with them, watching what's happening through their eyes and through your eyes, right? And,
yeah.
But stories are powerful. And I'm amazed every day to see the power of the stories that we tell and how it shifts way in which we not only we interact, but what we do.
It's absolutely incredible. I've had so many women tell me or just say thank you for allowing me to share my story and for allowing me to be heard. Because I've had women say that they've been on other podcasts where they don't even feel like they're being listened to as they're speaking. And I think that's horrible. You are opening up and being vulnerable and sharing your story, whatever that looks like. And for someone to be there with you and not actually listen to it, I think that's horrible.
Yeah. Look, I've worked with so many people where that is absolutely true, or where not only are you not listened to, your story isn't actually welcome. And I think that's even a bigger piece of it because, what happens so often is we're trying to outstory each other and allowing, especially through the lens of, we live in such exciting times right now. I mean, look at us in different places right now having, doing a recording of this podcast.
Yeah.
And, we've never met in person and yet we can have a vulnerable and deep conversation. And so, allowing ourselves the luxury of time and space to let the story that needs to be told unfold without the need to compete for the story,
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so beautiful about the world we live in, where we have these opportunities to do that. Never before in history have we had this power. And yet so many people and so many women are afraid to share their voice because it has been a competition for far too long.
Yeah, absolutely. And that needs to shift. And I think it is. It's starting to. We just need to continue on this path and continue to encourage people to share their stories.
Yeah.
Because it's so important.
Well, it is, and I said it before, our stories are the history we're creating or the future we're creating.
Yeah.
And so, what kind of a future do you want to create? I mean, we all look out and say we need to have a better world. Okay. Well, use your story to do that.
Exactly.
Use your story to create it, because we're living the stories that were told 50 years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
Those stories brought us to this place in time. And so what are we creating for the next 50 years?
Yeah, 100%. Andrea, what lights you up or inspires you the most about the work that you do?
The people I work with. I am so incredibly privileged to work with the people who I do. I get to meet new people every day who are literally changing our world. And I sit back and I'm just so honored to be able to be in their orbit and to be able to help them shape their stories. And I love what I do. It is a privilege and an honor. You know, I'm in the process right now of writing a book, and as I'm writing that, I'm expanding and exploring those stories even further and starting to understand my own story and how it can have impact. So it's an exciting process, and I'm very lit up to be
I
in
love
this
it.
world.
It's an incredible feeling, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It
Doing
really
what
is.
you're meant to do, finding your purpose on this planet, and doing that work. It's an incredible feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, on the flip side of that, what would you say is one of the most challenging parts of the work that you do?
You know, I think I think the hardest part is playing the dual role of being the business owner and the coach. It's a really tough place to be some days because the business demands certain things of me, and the coach in me, the idealist in me, doesn't always want to pay attention to that. And so I'm learning how to step away a little bit from some of the administrative pieces of it, and to step more into being a creator and allowing others to make some of those big decisions. Because at some point you have to
Yeah.
preserve I have to preserve my idealist nature, because that's where my creativity comes from. And so I can still be the owner of the company, but maybe I don't have to make all of the decisions.
There you go. What do you think your unique skill set or superpower is that's helped you become successful?
I think it's a combination of two things. I'm highly intuitive, and I'm a translator. I have always been able to understand things that others struggle with. So, and what I mean by that is, you know, back in my agency days and early on in my marketing career, I always understood technology and marketing, and I could translate between that, you know, and then it became, you know, databases and technology. And so I've always been able to translate the complex in a way that simplifies it for others. And today, that's exactly what I do. I translate for my clients these very big, complex ideas, and I help them to find the simple way of saying it without losing the complexity or the weight or the impact of the idea.
Now, speaking of success, Andrea, how do you define that word? What does the word success mean to you?
The word success for me means that I've made a difference in this world, that I've actually impacted the future for the positive. Does it mean that I'm, you know, financially well off? Well, I would hope so. Money is important in our world, but it's not what motivates me. You know, I have always believed, and I still do believe, that when you do what you're meant to do, which for me is to be a light in this world, so that those who need to work with me and those who I can help can find me, and I can help them be the lights that they need to be in this world. And so when I'm doing that, I'm a success, and everything else will follow from that point forward.
There you go. That's it right there. The money will come when you're doing what you're meant to do and you're happy doing it. Everything else will follow close behind, for sure.
Yeah. And you know, I think I would just add to that to go, you know, you need to be clear on the life you want, because I
Yes.
think it's, you know, the money will only follow if you want a life that requires money, you know, in the
Yeah.
quantities or whatever. So it is important. It's really, really important that you envision the life you want first, so that as you are being who you need to be in this world, the life you want is being created because of it.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's a great point. Andrea, who in your life has had the biggest impact on you and why?
My mother. You know, I lost my mother almost a year ago. We're just coming up on the 1-year anniversary of her
Sorry
death.
for your loss.
Oh, thanks. And as she left this world, you know, I did a lot of reflection on my relationship with her. And I think what I came to understand was that my mother gave me the freedom that she never chose to have. She inspired me to use my voice, to be, you know, a bit of a troublemaker from time to time, to, take risks, to be curious, to not settle, to be different. And these were all things that she never allowed herself to be. And as I look back now, as I watched her in her final years, I could see her regrets of not having done those things. And it inspired me to take the lessons that she gave me early on in life and to really step into them. And then, sort of put with that, the other person would be my daughter, because of course, my mother inspired me to use those things, but my daughter now, as I see her as a young adult, I want to be the best version of myself to create, sort of an opening for her to be that, So, look, we as women all step into our own voice in whatever way makes sense. But in doing so, we give maybe a model or a way for others to see their place. And so I hope that my child can see that in me.
So beautiful and so powerful. I love it. What is the most recent investment you've made in yourself?
So I just came back from a month-long sabbatical in Bali.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. And it was an investment. I had never taken a month off. I had never left, everything behind. And I literally completely unplugged. And
okay, so I have to ask, how hard was that for you to do?
It was hard, I would say, for about 3 days. And then, gosh, being in this beautiful country, it was so different. It was so incredible. I was staying with a friend of mine, so I lived like a local while I was there. It was an incredible investment in me. And what it did was it gave me a completely new perspective on myself and what I want for the next 20 years of my life. Some of it is still forming. What I knew was that in the coming back from that kind of a trip and truthfully investment was I am not the same person who left, and the person who I will become will be better to take myself and my company and everything into the future. So it was important. It was really important.
Transformation.
Yeah. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like one day you wake up and you're a different person.
No.
But what it does do is as you come back into your world, at least for me, everything looks just a little bit different. And I'm able to say no to many of the things that I wasn't able to say no to before.
Now that is definitely transformational.
Mm-hmm.
What does the word empowerment mean to you?
It's a funny word. I don't know that I like the word, because what it says is that it takes somebody else to give me power. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's true. So for me, the word itself is a little bit condescending.
Okay, we're going to jump into a little rapid fire section here. So the next grouping of questions just be 2, 3, 4 word answer type thing, okay?
Okay.
What is one thing you want but cannot buy with money?
Love. Love is the thing we all want, and it is the most valuable thing we'll ever have.
If you could teach the world one thing, what would it be?
Compassion. See each other with way more love and empathy, and the world would change.
If you were writing your autobiography, what would the title be?
Divergent.
If you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
Having helped many people to step into all of who they are and to be able to impact the world in the way that they want it to.
What never fails to make you laugh?
Funny videos. I love watching funny videos.
Okay.
They make me laugh.
That concludes our rapid fire section. Now back to our regularly scheduled program. What challenge in your life has shaped you the most, Andrea, would you say?
Oh, I've had so many challenges in my life, but I think when I was 23, I made the choice to move to Toronto by myself. I'm originally from Halifax. And that decision, that challenge of literally leaving everything I knew and everyone I loved behind and coming to a city that I had no knowledge of and didn't even have a job or a place to live. It forced me to see my life really differently as a young person, but it also showed me my own resilience. And I have never regretted that decision, and I continue to learn from it even now.
Now that's stepping outside your comfort zone. Holy shit. That's the epitome of it right there.
Yeah.
What would you say is one of the biggest things you've done or are doing that has helped you achieve the freedom to do the things you enjoy?
You know, the thing that I'm still learning, but that I know is the thing that gives me the most freedom, is learning how to trust. It is such a big, big lesson. And, you know, as I am right now rebuilding my business as we come out of COVID, because it was a challenging time for us. And as I am now stepping into a creative role as an author, as a content creator, it's trusting that all is well, trusting that everything that I need in order to step into that thought leader role will be given. And I know it will. And so I'm learning to trust the process. I'm learning to trust my team. I'm learning to trust myself. I'm learning to trust the economy. I'm learning how to trust. And that has been my biggest lesson in this life.
Trust and allow. That's a huge one for sure. What is one lesson your career has taught you that you think everyone should learn at some point in their lives?
Be a problem solver. You know, I think this is something that I see so much as now as an employer, as somebody who works with lots and lots of people, is that so many people don't realize that they know how to solve problems. And so I had to learn that very early on in my career. And so much of my success has been because I'm a problem solver. And to be a problem solver is really actually to be creative, but approaching everything from a place of curiosity of how can I solve this or how can I change this? And then coming up with solutions. And from those solutions, finding what works. I think too many people rely on everybody else to be the problem solver or looking for others to be that problem solver. We all have what we need within us. And if we just look a little deeper, we'll find the solution. So many of us seek outer validation, and we need to learn to think outside the box more. Yeah. And to see around ourselves. Like, I think it's not just think outside the box. It's actually to see outside of the box. Right.
Yeah.
Because we get boxed in, and it's like, oh, that's all we have. But the reality is that's not all we have. Step outside of it and just look, put your head up.
Open your damn eyes.
Just look around. And it's amazing. Like, we get tunnel vision. I was grocery shopping yesterday, and, it's funny, you're in the grocery store and head down, like, what do I need? This. And at one point I don't remember why, but I just happened to look up and I was like, holy, wow, I didn't see any of this stuff, And it was just one of those moments of like, wow, yeah, put your head up and look around. There's an entire world around you that often we just miss.
I think that also goes back to what we were talking about earlier about how we as human beings need to learn to slow the fuck down.
Oh, yeah.
And take notice of what's going on. As that saying goes, stop and smell the roses. Like, seriously, take the time.
Yeah.
Why are we always in such a damn rush? Like, just slow down.
Well, I think if COVID taught us nothing, it taught us that we have to slow down.
Yes.
I think that, the pre-pandemic, we were moving at such a ridiculous pace. It was unsustainable. And I think one of the best outcomes of the pandemic is so many of us have no tolerance anymore for that level of output. We just are incapable of running at that pace anymore, because it is not okay for us to run at that pace. Our bodies were breaking down. Our minds were breaking down. And we see that. That's why we've got so much mental health issues, because, you know, the reality is so many people out there right now are still trying to do it, and we just don't have the tolerance for it anymore. And so we have to call it and go, we are slowing down, and be unapologetic about that.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. Absolutely. It needs to carry on. And in some aspects it has, but in others, I think we still need to learn. Like, did you not learn anything from what we've just been through the past 2.5 years? Like, look at what happened. You know, I mean, this was the first opportunity in a century that we've had this opportunity to slow down and just be in the present moment. Stop thinking about what needs to get done. Stop thinking about what happened before. Just be in the present moment, period, and enjoy it.
And look, the world didn't end when we were all locked down.
No.
You know, and I think, you know, that's the message. Like for me, like I said, my business was, I work in a business, you know, in an industry that was largely driven by live events. And so we saw, you know, the first month of the pandemic, every project that I had on the go was canceled within about a 5-day period.
Yeah.
And, you know, and we didn't see revenue return for over a year. And even then it returned only at about 20% of what we had previously experienced.
Yeah.
And so it has been an incredibly challenging time for us, but yet we're still here. We're still resilient. Right. We're still doing the work. We're still imagining what could be. And that is a success in and of itself. And therefore, why rush?
Listen, the loss was great on so many different fronts for so many people, financial, personal, like it was massive. It was horrible. But I think that if we can just look within, because I believe that this was one of the best things that could have happened, because even though in spite of all the loss, there is a silver lining. We just need to look within and find it, because it is there. And the lesson was for us to slow the fuck down, that we can't continue at the pace we were going.
Well, I think history will look back at this time and say it was a time of great awakening. You know, we saw more people become awake to their lives because we've been sleepwalking through our lives.
Yeah.
And so we awakened to what was important in this time, and it's still happening. I mean, we're not fully out of it, but, you know, I think, like I said, history will look back and see how this was the point at which everything changed.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you're at the pivot point of a change, it's damn painful. Oh man. It's
and scary.
And scary. And, you know, and disorienting. And, you know, like, we are at the crux of it. And yet this is the point where people would say, I wonder what it was like to live through that. You know, so, you know, this will be a time that will be looked back by future generations with respect, with admiration, you know, and with curiosity of, I wonder what that was like. And so, you know, it's hard. Yes. And it's really an exciting time.
For sure. I agree. Andrea, if you had the opportunity to sit down and have a 1-hour conversation with one woman, any woman in the world, who would it be and why?
You know, I'm thinking it would be a world leader. You know, actually, who would be really interesting is Madeleine Albright. I mean, I know she's, you know, no longer sort of in that seat of power that she once was, but she's had a purview of, you know, her or Angela Merkel, like those two, sort of those who have been in the seat of power of looking at world events, of changing how we perceive women and leadership. I would love to hear their lessons. You know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is another one who had such foresight. And I think that's what I see in these powerful women. To me, they have shaped the world of governance in a way that is beginning to be more accepting to women. And we're not there yet. Oh, we've got so much more, territory to build, but they're laying down some of those pieces for us. And it's important. I don't know who the leaders, the new ones are coming up. And I think and that's a shame that I don't know, because I should know. And I don't say that with self-deprecation. I'm simply saying it because I don't think our world knows who they are.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say.
But it is stepping into that. Nancy Pelosi would be another one. Like, these are women who are shaping so much of the governance. And I think if we look to the next 20 years, we're seeing all of our systems and structures crumble right now. Right. And governance is in that place. But as it crumbles and as we rebuild it, women have to have a bigger voice. And so how are we doing that? And who are the ones that will come up and really make a difference in the governance structures that we will create? Because they will look very different than the governance structures we have today. And,
Sure.
I'd go out on a limb and say, we'll start to see global governance come out of some form of a female-led initiative.
And so it should. It's time. Mm-hmm. It's long overdue.
I agree.
If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
I would tell myself that there's nothing wrong with me, that my brain does work differently than other people's, and just to hang in there, and that I am as smart as I think I am, and don't worry about being right, because it's not about being right. What you're trying to do is to be heard and to be seen. And so from that place, be okay with the fact that your brain works differently, and that when you're speaking up, ask people to hear you and not to agree with you.
Love it. Lastly, Andrea, if you were to deliver your last 30-second speech to the world, your tribe, your corner of the world, your people, what would that last 30 seconds sound like? What words of wisdom would you impart?
You're more powerful than you know. You create impact with every step you take. And so step up, tell your story, use your story, recognize that everything that has led you to this point in your life has given you the words and the tools and the concepts that you need to create the impact that you want to make. Don't be afraid. Use your voice, tell your stories, and be the change that you want to see in the world, because we need your story. We need your diversity. We need you to show up in all of who you are without apology.
Beautifully said. Wow. What an incredibly powerful and beautiful way to end the interview. Andrea, thank you so much. This has been such an incredibly beautiful, inspiring, amazing, thought-provoking, educational conversation. I truly appreciate every minute that we've gotten to spend together today and share in your journey. You are a bright, beautiful light doing incredibly important work and shining that light out into the world, and shining that light out into the world for women to know that they need to step up and use their voice. So thank you for being here today. I appreciate you. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Brad. It has been my honor and privilege to be a guest on your show today. And I am so excited for everything that you're doing and the creations that you're making in this world. So thank you for putting this out there and for doing all you do for women.
My pleasure and my honor. Once again, my name is Brad Walsh, host of your Empowerography podcast. Today, my guest has been Andrea Sampson. She is the CEO and founder of Talk Boutique and an executive speakers coach who works with TED speakers. Thank you so much, Andrea. I hope you have an amazing rest of the day.
Thanks so much, Brad. You take care.
Thank you very much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't yet, please be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and share with all your friends. You can find me at viseuphoria.ca and follow me on Instagram at Empowerography Podcast and on Facebook at Empowerography. Please join me next time for another inspirational story from yet another amazing woman.